Coogs house. Okay, yes, Houston's got an uphill battle this Saturday when they take on the Iowa State Cyclones, but it's not like some we believe in miracles kind of nonsense, right?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater can stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below whether you think the dip or the chip are more important when it comes to your chips and dips. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. More on that later. We got a lot to get into today. I want to talk to some about what this game means for Houston in the Big 12 as they continue to find their place in it, especially in this new Willie Fritz era. I want to talk some about what to expect out of these two quarterbacks, this dual quarterback system that feels like Houston's still going to roll with this weekend. But first and foremost, it is Friday, and that means we're talking about how Houston can pull off this football game. Yes, we're talking about ways Houston can pull off the upset and beat the Iowa State Cyclones on Saturday. Obviously, Houston is a heavy underdog in this game. I don't mean to say that like this is a Houston wins 9 out of 10 times, anything like that. It's probably, frankly, far from that. But it's college football. Weird things happen. Iowa State is not like a juggernaut. They're frankly in like a latter part of a similar rebuild themselves. They weren't so good just a couple seasons ago. And in watching the Iowa game fully and then kind of rewatching parts of it as well that they played, watching a lot of their early game against North Dakota. And then I got to be honest, I didn't watch all of the Arkansas State game because, well, that wasn't exactly a matchup worth watching. But I did see some things that I noticed, and it felt like the thing we got to start with, they're going to do three things. If Houston were to win this game, there are three things they've got to do, okay? And the first is they've got to get after the quarterback with that pass rush. It's kind of, this under-discussed thing, I think, with Iowa State. Their offensive line is by far and away their weakest offensive unit. I would argue the weakest unit on their team. And they did bring back 5 starters, it looks like, compared to a year ago in reading something on them. But that doesn't mean that they're infallible. Frankly, while obviously Iowa's a fairly strong Big Ten team right now, their defensive front kind of had their way with the Iowa State offensive line for a lot of the game. And when we've seen Houston be successful for a large portion of the Oklahoma game and then against Rice, it's been when they can take advantage of weaker offensive line groups. I think this is the same kind of moment, right? Where much like they did against Jackson Arnold, they get him off his spots, get him pressured. You start sending dogs and occasional fifth-man blitzes and things like that. Occasional twisting, right? Iowa does a lot of that kind of stuff with the defensive line. Houston is a lot more of sending that fifth guy through different gaps than a more traditional D-line twist. But it's definitely the weakest portion of the Iowa State team. It's the part that Houston's going to have to take advantage of if they want to win this football game. Last year, this was actually, I believe I read, the lowest, the lowest PFF grade for any offensive line unit in power conference football, right? And so while they returned their 5 starters, I think that is a group Houston can take advantage of. And frankly, they can kind of make the rest of the defense's job a lot easier by doing that. Again, we saw Houston do this and follow this game plan against Oklahoma, because my second thing Houston's got to do to win this football game, if they're going to win this football game and pull the upset off, is they've got to limit the explosive plays out of Iowa State. Now, I will say that Iowa State, frankly, is a very explosive team. Jalen Noel is a big, big part of that. The receiver's got 300-something yards on the year already. He's got a 75-yard touchdown catch that completely changed the game against Iowa. But he also like a 55. I had 55-yard catch. I think someone said that was off on that against North Dakota. Jalen Noel is a really, really talented 5'10" receiver. I continue to be impressed on watching him a lot this week about like he's not like the wiggly 5'10" guy you think he is when he gets off the bus and you hear about his numbers. He really is like a straight line track speed kind of guy. He's hard to keep up with. And he's a well-built 5'10". He's not like a scrawny little speedster. He's a good athlete. He's really talented. And he's kind of have his 6'6" we'd be talking about like a definite long-term pro. He's talented enough to get a real shot. I just don't know what 5'10" where he gets taken without that wiggle, but he's got enough speed that doesn't really matter. The other guy that's explosive in the pass game is Jaden Higgins, 6'4", 210, catches a lot of balls. He's great at the box out kind of stuff on jump balls, and he shields the safety off when he crosses on crossers. They use those two guys a lot. They catch the vast majority of the footballs for this football team. The other threat that this looks like it opens up to when you're watching them play is they have these two guys that your defensive coverage have to shift to, and that opens up the middle of the field for this tight end. Now he's 6'7", listed at 250 pounds. He is a giant. But Iowa State Cyclone tight end, I believe it's pronounced Benjamin Bramer. He's, again, big guy. He's certainly not like bigger than Malik Carr, Houston's own tight end. And so I would think, well, you don't want to take away from Malik's practice. Using him as an example of how to cover these guys would be, frankly, the easier part of the coverage as far as those three pass catchers go. I would be much more concerned with staying over the top of Jalen Noel in zone, passing that off well, the communication there, etc. And then, obviously, like I mentioned, Jaden Higgins kind of being the big guy that you probably can't cover just one-on-one because he is such a big box-out type of wide receiver. Houston DBs are talented. They've stepped up to the task before. Cincinnati was not their best showing, and so limiting explosive plays to these guys like Jalen Noel is going to be huge. And frankly, it's kind of a chance for them to kind of reassert themselves as, through the first three games, the most dominant part of this team, right? And so I think that that's going to be important for them. And then last but not least, and I'm probably going to say this part like 10 times in this podcast, but the third thing Houston's got to do to win this game is take care of the football. The defensive backfield at Iowa State is probably the best defensive backfield Houston's played this year. And it will likely be the best defensive backfield they play for most of the year. I guess on the aggregate, Utah has a very good team. Without diving too deep into them yet, they may be a contender for this or what have you. But the Iowa State DB room is incredibly talented and incredibly deep too. And so I look at those guys and I kind of think, honestly, that that's the kind of thing where, and we'll talk about the quarterback play in the second segment, where the goal should be, as far as finding the open player, right? It's okay to take, if your defense is playing like it should or playing as well as we need it to in this game, it's okay to take a lot of check down kind of stuff early and, be strategic with taking your deep shots. We've been talking about Houston needs to incorporate more of those. This is not the game to get silly and just start doing them a bunch of the time by any stretch, but being strategic with doing those, setting them up with earlier kind of stuff is going to be important as well. If you're looking at like names in that backfield, Darian Porter and I think it's Bo Frailer. Those are two guys to keep an eye on. Porter as a DB is pretty talented. He's also a 6'4" DB. So he, as a corner at 6'4", is frankly like long armed and gets his hand on the ball a lot. A really, really talented corner, a definite pro prospect. They may move him to safety at that level, but he's a pro. Very, very talented group, right? Very, very talented group. And I look at them as a whole and unit and continue to be really, really impressed. Now, the way to combat that is with quarterback play. And I know that that falls on the shoulders of a couple of guys this week for Houston. And I want to spend some time in the second segment talking about what exactly that could mean. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you a little bit about our buddies at Robinhood Gold, because with Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. That's like a cup of coffee. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhoodgold.com. Sign up at robinhood.com/ I got excited. Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing does involve risk. Rates may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. All right, now, Parker Angel Locked On Coogs here talking about Houston walking into the TDECU, still, I guess technically called TDECU Stadium, and knocking out Iowa State in an upset this weekend. What is it going to take? It's going to take good quarterback play. And for Houston this weekend, it appears that that may really mean two quarterbacks. Last week in Cincinnati, if you were living under a rock, out of the country, not paying attention, or just had better things to do than not feel so good about Houston Cougar football as they lost Cincinnati pretty badly, you might have missed that Houston actually made a gigantic change in the second half. And after the first series of the third quarter, went with backup quarterback Zeon Chriss. Zeon Chriss has not thrown the ball much at all this season. He played, I believe it was a series, might have been two series, against UNLV to start the year. He was injured in that stint, did not play against Oklahoma after that. Played some mop-up duty against Rice, and then obviously took over a lot of the second half against Cincinnati. And when asked about after the game, in an emotional post-game moment, Fred said something to the fact of, like, the best players got to play. We'll figure it out. Then as they got into Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday in the meetings, it sounds more and more like the decision is back to being up in the air, and they're going to split time. Split time being Zeon Chriss and starter Donovan Smith. Donovan, while he had, I think, a better than discussed, or he had last season, he had a much better year than this year for sure. But people were kind of dogged him, I thought, undeservedly last season. This season, he's earned a lot of that. He's had a really tough go of it this year, having trouble taking care of the ball, having trouble pushing the ball downfield. And it just feels like the game's moving faster for him now than it did a year ago. Without any journalism or any insight, I haven't talked to anyone on the offensive staff about what are you planning on doing, and certainly not with any actual answers back or anything. I do think that the way I imagine this will go is the rotation will be is like 2 Smith series for every Zeon Chriss series. If it were going to be more than that, I don't think we would have had the walking back of the idea early in the week. If it was more demonstrative than that, I don't think that would have happened. I also think that in watching film and grading film throughout the week, the offensive staff probably realizes there's more to it than just the quarterback. We spoke on Monday and Tuesday about how the quarterback gets a lot of blame when things go poorly, and inversely does get credit when things go well. And Donovan Smith has shown before, while it has not been this season, that he can do things like complete 12 or 14 passes in a row to beat West Virginia a year ago and lead game-winning drives against Baylor. And so he's done those kinds of things. And then you go further back, frankly, he actually played pretty well at Texas Tech too, before ultimately getting benched along the way there. He had some pretty good games there, I should say. Obviously, things didn't go so great by the end of it. The regression, I think, is huge, though. And it's really, it is a new offensive coordinator. He missed the spring. There were no preseason games in college football, etc. But in a Smith, if that's the rotation, they're really going to go a true rotating system. I think there's things you got to look for in those series. In every series you get Donovan Smith, he's going to need to find a way to both push the ball and take care of it. A year ago, he was able to keep defenses honest with his deep shot. A third of his touchdowns were passes where the ball went over 20 yards in the air. This year, just 9 of his 95 passes have traveled 20 yards or more in the air. Now, again, I've said it before, said it again, the DBs this week are incredibly tough. And as a unit, they're really good. And so maybe it's not the week to open it up as more as plays conservatively, trust your defense and score a couple touchdowns, keep it low scoring, and see if you can win it at the end, right? I get that strategy, and that's probably more realistic of what Houston does. But if we're going to get Donovan back and better as we needed him to be, they're going to have to open up the deep third of the field again. And I don't know what to say besides they've got to figure it out getting those shots in. The wide receiver room is too talented to have this poor of a passing game. And it's not the problem I saw coming in the offseason where I was like, they're not going to throw the ball enough. They're throwing the ball more than I would have anticipated, actually. Now, some of that's been scoreboard induced. But the truth is the type of passing is super short, well, generally behind the line of scrimmage. Last week, Joseph Manjack caught a 52-yard pass and finished the game with 51 yards receiving because his next pass went backwards. And I am not saying that there's never a place for that, but there's got to be a little more balance in what we're doing. And again, the deep shots this week got to be strategic, but they probably still need to happen. When Donovan's at his best, that's part of the game, right? Regardless, whatever passing game they go with, Donovan's got to be able to take care of the ball. The Iowa State game plan is based a lot about having talented DBs that make you make mistakes, right? As a unit, they've got 5 picks through just 3 games, and frankly, if they'd played someone that passed the ball more than Iowa did, they might have more. And so I look at a really talented group over there and think, man, if we can hold on the ball, we got a shot. But that's going to be an easier said than done kind of thing. The Zeon Chris series, need to make sure that when he's in the game, there needs to be a realistic threat that he can throw the football. This year, he's thrown 5 passes. He's dropped back more like 9 times. He's thrown 5 passes. If I were a defensive coordinator playing Zeon Smith, I would not have a player lined up deeper than 8 yards off the ball. And frankly, I'd have everyone's first step be forward. There's no threat to me in watching what Houston's done with him for him to put it deep. If I turn on his tape from Louisiana, last year he had the longest pass in terms of yards where the ball was in the air in all of college football. He can do it. They haven't opened it up. And I think there at least has to be some sort of threat there. Now, that's the coaching side of this. The player side of this for Zeon Chris is he has to be right with his own reads and RPO concepts and all of those kinds of things where he's making a read of the defense. It is a much faster pace of football than he played at Louisiana. And I understand there's some adjustment period there, and live reps are live reps. And even a spring rep for a quarterback as a runner is not really the same as a game rep. But by this point, we're a third of the way through the season, he's got to be right on those things because he's a dynamic runner, but all of the schemes are based around him making the right reads there. There's no scheme for a guy that makes the wrong hand or keep read, right? Regardless of who is the quarterback, I imagine we see a heavy dose of Re'Shaun Sanford, of Stacey Sneed, and I frankly could see Jamarian Burnett get some run too. I think Re'Shaun Sanford's going to have a big day, both from his personality as the type of kid that bounces back from adversity, including his own injury and things like that, right? 2 fumbles last week is not what he wants to be known for. I imagine he's going to run with an anger about him because of that, just from a personality standpoint. He's also proven to be incredibly well fit for the zone running scheme Houston did so well with, both against Oklahoma, relatively speaking. Oklahoma, they did pretty well in the run game there. And then against Rice, the run game kept the Oklahoma game as close as it was. Ate up a lot of clock, kept the ball moving forward slowly. Ultimately, they had a couple negative plays in the second half, that in fourth quarter specifically, obviously, the safety that really shot them in the foot. And then there were times where I thought they ran the ball at the wrong time, like third and long, right? But on the whole, the run game's been strong. The games Houston's look good. That's going to fall on Re'Shaun Sanford again. I would anticipate him having a good game on Saturday if Houston can keep it close, and especially if Houston really can pull off the upset here. Again, it's an uphill battle. I'm not saying it's a guarantee or anything like that, but this is not some juggernaut. This in Georgia where they've lost one game by 3 points. So it's conference title games, only game they lost in 3 years, right? This is a much more realistic upset that Houston can pull off. And I want to talk about the game and Houston finding their way in the Big 12 and stuff after the game. But first, we did mention today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, NFL fans can get a start on the season with a big return from FanDuel. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, or you check the latest stats, or you view the live play-by-play or whatever, you can do all that on the same page as you place your bets on with FanDuel. You can start with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Right now, the Houston game it's kind of moved wider than it was earlier this week. I think Houston keeps it closer than the spread is right now. I'd say, at least put Houston down there. Whatever you do, you got to do it at FanDuel.com. Park Rangers Locked On Coogs here, talking about Houston and Iowa State this weekend. And frankly, I think there is a potential for an upset here that's not getting talked about on the national level enough. And I get it. Houston's not looked good this year. And frankly, I've admitted this is not the kind of thing where Houston would win 6 out of 10 times or whatever like that. But Iowa State's got some holes. More importantly, if Houston plays their best football, those holes kind of line up with what Houston does well. Houston's a team that's trying to run the football in a dominant fashion. We've seen, when Iowa was taking control of Iowa State, that's what they were doing as well. We've seen Houston's defense get after quarterbacks, and that's really how they open up a lot of what they want to do. The Iowa State offensive line is not very strong, or not strong in terms. They may all bench press a lot. It's not their best unit by any stretch, right? In looking at them a lot in the last week, it looks like to me it's their worst unit. Okay. I look at all that and say that this game feels like another Oklahoma type of game to me. A top 20 team, couple of strong units, but some kind of under-discussed weaknesses because of preseason hype coming in or whatever. And again, I'm not ever going to take anything away from this Iowa State DB room. The Cyclones have pretty good athletes back there, right? But what I am going to say is that covers up a lot, especially in their front seven. And that the defense is covered up a lot, especially in their offense and offensive line, right? And I think that those are things that Houston can have some success with. To me, that feels a lot like Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma's strength was their defensive front seven, so Houston's run game didn't fit quite as well, but the game plan should be the same. Should be run the ball, keep the game low scoring, keep it close, have a chance to go win at the end, and hopefully the end goes better. Hopefully you're not down 2 and taking a safety. Hopefully you're down 2 and driving down for a game-winning field goal, right? Like that's the kind of thing that would make this obviously a lot better outcome, but also like a very realistic path for Houston. As far as finding their way in the Big 12 after this one goes, right? Obviously, I'm sitting here talking myself into an upset victory on a Friday. That's what I do every football season, every game. It's part of being a fan. But also, I think that the biggest thing people really want is something to lean into, some sort of an effort that people can get behind. People were disappointed with Cincinnati last week. getting blanked is not great. It happened against Kansas State last year as well. And Kansas State was a much better team than Cincinnati was. And people looking for some sort of a rebound from that. Frankly, while Iowa State is good, it's not like they're the best team on paper you're playing this year. And so you got to make sure you look competitive, look like you're getting better. There needs to be visible evidence that the team is getting better. And for what it's worth, I think a lot of the fans understand that this is a rebuilding season. Everyone wants to win every game, and I talk myself into a win by every Friday. But the realistic goal coming this year was not to be a college football playoff team this year, as awesome as that would have been to have been the shock the world team. The goal was to be getting better every week, establish some culture stuff under the Fritz era, and then build on what they've done and already done in the 2025 and 2026 recruiting classes, which, again, if you're not paying attention, the 2025 and 2026 recruiting classes are really good. The kids that are coming in are going to be really good. The young kids on this roster are really good. The future is bright. They just have to get there, right? The other part about this is that, you're trying to do all of that culture setting and giving fans something to lean into and that. And it's also a family weekend. It is a game that you'd anticipate, both because it's a Big 12 opponent. It's a 6 o'clock game, a 6 o'clock local time game for the folks watching elsewhere, like myself. 6 o'clock local time game, and it's family weekend. There's gonna be, for U of H, a lot of people there, and I think that's again giving those people reasons to continue to come back. Again, reasons can be strong effort, creative play calling, things that don't leave us scratching our head, certainly in terms of play calling, and guys clearly fighting through adversity, because there will be adversity in this football game, right? That I think would be a win in of itself. Now, I'm not, as a coach, I'm anti. As an analyst, I'm just a little different as far as moral victory guy. I'm not really that guy. I do think there's a path to victory on the football field. But looking at a victory and a hire of Coach Fritz, I think we see how that team responds this week, right? That team that got blanked in Cincinnati and left Fritz, frankly, a little dumbfounded and embarrassed post-game. Looked like he was flabbergasted at how poor the game went. I think we see how they respond by playing a much better football team. They enter a stretch here, frankly, where they play a lot of really good football teams over the next 5 weeks, and I guess 6 weeks. There's a bye in there. This is a tough test. This is power conference football, and I think there's a path to victory on the field. I think it can be done. It doesn't take some, do you believe in miracles, final victory tour or victory scenes like you had for the Miracle on Ice in 1980. But it does require some levels of discipline, taking care of the football, and it'll take, playing better simply than they've played. I don't think that's possible. I don't think it's crazy to expect them to play better. I don't think it's crazy to expect or to want or to talk yourself into a victory by every Friday, because that's kind of what I do. Now it's going to be awkward when we play a game on Thursday. But until then, Parker Ainsworth hosts a Locked On Coogs. You find me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Painsworth512 to talk all things Houston Cougars and more. That and more will be important soon. Locked On Coogs is a primary Locked On podcast. Everything's your team every day. Go Coogs.